on this part to respond to a few of the last speakers we've had on this issue of the appointment to the board, because I do think it's an important process and it's worth taking some time to respond to. And I think when you look at this, you have to start off by acknowledging that this process that we're developing in this legislation and through this part began because the Auckland Council came to the government and asked us to develop an expedited process. It was the Auckland Council who wanted the government to work with them to come up with a legislative framework that would mean this plan wouldn't take 10 years to be in place, but that we could be delivered much more quickly. And we agreed that that was an important objective. So we worked with the Council to deliver this process. And effectively what it does is take what would have been a two-stage hearing process of a full round of submissions and mediations and hearings and decisions at a council level, and then all of that replicated once more at the Environment Court level and combine it into one process. And Mr Chairman, I don't think there is anyone who has sensibly suggested that the Auckland Unitary Plan, if it had progressed under the normal Schedule 1 process, wouldn't have gone off to the Environment Court. So what you have to consider in actual fact is that the decisions under the Unitary Plan without this would have been made by the Environment Court. And of course it's trite to point out that the Auckland Council doesn't get to appoint who sits on the Environment Court to hear the decision. So in that respect, the fact that the Auckland Council are not the appointers of the final decision makers is absolutely consistent with the normal Schedule 1 processes. And in fact, I'd go so far as to say that the Auckland Council and the Independent Māori Statutory Board have a greater ability to be involved in the decision makers in this process, because there is a statutory requirement that the Minister for the Environment and the Minister of Conservation must consult with both the Auckland Council and the Independent Māori Statutory Board in making those appointments. So what we had to do, Mr Chair, was balance the desire of Auckland Council to be fully in charge of this process versus what we saw was about protecting the rights of Aucklanders to have confidence that the final decision makers were independent as they would be at the Environment Court stage. So I don't think it's a fair comparison to look at this appointment process versus an Auckland Council process. It's a far better comparison to consider how this process works versus an Environment Court process, which would have been the final decision maker. And just to repeat, of course, in that process, Auckland Council would have had no say at all as to who the decision makers were in the plan process. And I don't think that it can be fairly suggested that it would be appropriate for the Auckland Council to have the say on who is the judge and jury on what is also their plan. So if we're going to combine a council plan and a council plan process and an Environment Court process into one, in my view, the independent oversight that the Environment Court hearing represented was a critical component of what had to be maintained. So that is why the decision that was reached by Cabinet, and believe me, this was a process of ongoing discussions with Council around these very issues. So this is not something we haven't considered. This was something that we worked through very carefully with the Council. We listened in great detail to their representations, but it was our strong view that it was important that that independence that you would have had at the Environment Court was replicated in this process. And can I just point out to members of the House that while this legislation is making its way through the House and without any presumption of its progress, we have already begun some initial preliminary consultations with the Council. Obviously there's an awareness that the Council are very keen to get their plan underway, and we certainly don't want to be any barrier to that. So we've begun a process of discussing with the Council as to who they would want to suggest for that board, and those processes are working very well, and I have great confidence we will come up with a board that has the support of all parties, and that's certainly my intention. But I did want to make the point that we absolutely considered this issue. We talked extensively with the Council around it, and there are very good reasons why we made the decision that it is more appropriate that the Council not be an appointer of decision makers on their plan.
I call Denise Roach.
Thank you, Mr Chair, and thank you for that contribution from the Minister. I think there is still room for this plan to be